Good evening, this is State of the Nation. Now, a woman has been charged with assault by beating and criminal damage after a milkshake was thrown at Nigel Farage yesterday. The incident happened as the new leader of Reform UK launched his constituency election campaign. Obviously, with the arrest, it would be improper of us to comment on this particular case much further. However, we thought now would be a good time to discuss attacks on political and public figures. One man, one journalist with personal experience of that is Andy Ngo, the author of the New York Times bestseller Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. Andy, thanks for joining us in the studio. First of all, can you tell us what happened with regard to the attack that you faced?
Well, back in 2019, I think it was in May, was the first time that Mr. Farage had a drink thrown on him. And at that time, the Americans responded much like a lot of British did. Oh, it's a drink on him. And I think that was my initial reaction too. It's like a very unpleasant thing to have witnessed. But then a month after that, when I was documenting a public demonstration in Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time, I was beaten by the mob with people having weapons in their hands and punching me repeatedly on the head. And as I was stumbling to get away from the beating, bleeding from my ears, bleeding from my eyes and face, then the mob hurled drinks into my eyes to blind me. And I suffered a traumatic brain injury from that mob beating. I was very lucky to survive it. It gave me a whole different perspective on acts of political violence that people minimize. A lot of people in media or activists minimize. In this country, you have hundreds of acid attacks a year. And I think in that context, having a stranger come up to somebody and hurl an unknown liquid into one's face, that's when milkshaking is not milkshaking. And I think that's how insidious this whole act is. On the outside, it does look like someone's just dumping a drink on you. What's the problem? You don't know who this person is. You don't know what they're throwing at in your face, in your eyes. And that act is meant to terrorize an individual, and that it's being done to a political person in your country, I think speaks to the state of democratic culture here.
Of course, in our culture, in Western democratic culture, there's always been egging. There's always been this sort of perhaps medieval tradition of throwing rotten fruit at the person that you dislike. Is it not too dissimilar from that? After all, we can name many, many politicians. Ed Miliband, David Cameron, indeed a lookalike of Rishi Sunak only a couple of weeks ago got egged when the person thought that they were actually egging the real Prime Minister. Is there a risk that we overinterpret what's going on here?
No, I think the risk is we're underinterpreting what's happening. In egg, we know what an egg looks like. We don't know when someone's coming up with a liquid in a container and that person is a stranger and throwing that in your eyes, you don't know what that is.
No, and I suppose that context that you raise of the acid and indeed alkaline attacks as well, attacks with corrosive substances that we've started to see more and more in cities like London, in our major cities in the UK. It's been a more recent phenomenon. Perhaps that's shifted the dial on this.
I would hope so. On the social media responses I've just been tracking from particularly left-wing activists and commentators, it's been disappointing, although not surprising, to see a lot of them minimize and mock the attacks that have happened. And again, it's this rhetorical trick. It's just milkshaking. It's not just milkshaking. You're blinded. And also, it encourages other people. I think as people make excuses for it, we may see that people will feel empowered to treat politicians in that way.
Now, you were attacked in the United States of America, in a highly political city. Do you sense there's a difference in political culture on this side of the Atlantic, that things are perhaps less tense than they are over in the United States of America, where you often now hear talk of almost civil war?
Things are less tense here, but I worry for your country because a lot of the political culture of America does seep into the United Kingdom in various ways. And as I said, your democratic culture is at risk if if people continue to normalize acts of violence, it is a slippery slope. One day it's a egg, next it's a milkshake, next it's some other liquid, then it's not too far from punch. And this is also in the context of people, a mob, and somebody taking that initial physical encounter with another person inspires other people to take action as well.
Well, Andy Nyo, thank you so much for joining us and talking through your experience above everything else.